Hi, everybody. Nancy Kuhajda here. Thank you, Andrew, for that great introduction. And I am super excited to share information on winter sowing. Now, the title is a little misnomer here. I meant for it to say annuals, vegetables, perennials, and basically anything else you could ever winter sow. So, we're going to talk about this whole process. I've been doing winter sowing for over 10 years, and by tips and tricks of my own trials, I have come up with some really great new shortcuts. Perhaps you heard that winter sowing was for natives only, and I'm here to tell you it is so, so much more. All right, so just to go over what we're going to learn today, I always like to give a brief rundown. How was winter sowing invented? Why winter sow? What are the benefits of winter sowing over other methods of seed starting? Why can winter sowing be used for more than just native seed? What are the updated methods, tips, and tricks for winter sowing? This is my real money shot to give you some real tips of things that have streamlined this process and made it a lot easier. Are there any limitations to which seeds should be used for winter sowing? What are the growing on steps for winter sown seedlings? And what are the problems you can expect when doing winter sowing? I was just talking to Andrew briefly before we started, and he asked me about how long I've been doing this. And it's been a long time, but the things I can tell you, the real reason I'm excited about this today is a lot of people have tried winter sowing, either for the classical native plant or they've tried other things. And by not catching on to some of the significant nuances related to the winter sowing process, a lot of people will put the winter sowing kit together, but then when it comes to the flip side, when we are having seedlings and we're going to be putting them out in the garden, they revert back to their old ideas of what seed starting has always been for them, which is starting inside in an overly warm environment, in an overly artificial light environment, and you have a lot of weak, stringy seedlings that are not successful. The number one thing I want to stress is by doing winter sowing, you are going to get the best seedlings of your life. Stout, taut seedlings with barely any above ground growth and huge growth below, gigantic root systems. Okay, so winter sowing is an efficient way to start your seeds, harnessing nature's power instead of making your own power to create strong, stout seedlings with strong stems and highly developed root systems, far stronger than those that are started inside in warm conditions. Okay, kind of going over the benefits of winter sowing. Think to yourself if you've ever started seeds inside. Now, maybe you are an old-fashioned seed starter like me, where you put a few yogurt cups that you poked a few holes in the bottom of that you stuck on your on your windowsill, and you tried to start some seedlings there. Or maybe you went high tech. You started and bought a heat mat, you got a fan, you got particular starting supplies. None of that is necessary with winter sowing. We don't need a supplemental light source. It is designed by nature and carried out by nature. The heat mat, no. We're not preheating the seeds to getting them going. We are actually using the genetics from inside the seed itself as to when it will pre-program itself to start to germinate on its own. We don't have to dedicate a large space indoors. Basically, you just need an outside space where you can connect your containers together so they don't go flying over to the neighbor's yard. You hate that when that happens, when your lettuce comes up in your neighbor's flowers, don't you? And then there's no fans required, no special trays, no watering setup. Now, I'm not saying that there's no watering, particularly in these times of where we've had these really droughty winters. It is crucial to make sure your winter sowing containers stay hydrated. But if set up properly, you virtually have very little to do with that. And there is no hardening off. So, hardening off, if anyone is unfamiliar with that term, is when we typically start seeds indoors in a warm condition, and that we basically are imitating summer. So think of tomatoes and peppers, the Solanaceae or sun-loving family. Those plants are native to Peru, and in order to get them started indoors, to kickstart them, we recreate the conditions of Peru or inside of a greenhouse. So when the plants do go outside into our weather spring conditions, we have to kind of back up the clock and tentatively, slowly orient the new seedlings that are way too tender and way too gentle just to be stuck out in the garden right away. With winter sowing, that doesn't exist at all because the plants are not going to germinate until the time and the temperature outside seems appropriate because Mother Nature is offering all of this. There's little to no supplemental watering. And the best thing is it's upcycling materials. Who doesn't have an extra jug around? Pretty soon you'll be raiding your neighbor's recycle bins. Okay, so as I alluded to, winter sowing isn't just for natives anymore. The picture I have there is some winter sowing greens that I started. And that's a very significant picture we'll refer to a lot throughout this program. But you can start annuals, biennials, vegetables, herbs, and perennials using this method. Um, a great use of winter sowing if you just want to experiment with winter sowing. And just remember, be cognizant of the fact that regardless of what we do in the garden and how we start growing, it's all a massive experiment. This has become incredibly successful in all my projects, so much so that we've been able to offer plant sales from these winter sowing starts now that we would have never had the volume to do before. But remember, it's always an experiment. And if you are tentative about doing this and still want to rely on other methods, definitely. But this will be the easiest, simplest system you've ever had with results better than you can imagine. One of my particular successes is I am very fond of growing poppies of many kinds and also hollyhocks. Many of you who've started seeds before know that those are two biennials that are problems for starting inside because they are all tap rooted and they have a very difficult time translating into the garden once they've started inside. I have found with winter sowing that it is incredibly successful, even with some of the most finicky poppies, to be able to get them to come to fruition in the garden. And it's really great. So it's not just for perennials anymore. Oops, sorry. Okay. So the humble beginners of winter sowing. So this didn't start out at a university. This started out by a person who gardened, and she didn't have any of the supplies needed that we just mentioned, all the things we went over, didn't have enough space in her small living space, had nowhere to put up a table that was going to get enough sunlight. And so she partnered with the USDA to try to create a more effective and efficient, successful way of getting highly successful transplants. She didn't have any of those supplies, so she actually looked at a milk jug and I put these two slides together right here because really when you look at it, your basic translucent jug does look like a little mini greenhouse. And that's how the whole thing started. The one thing I want to pay close attention to, and I'll focus on it again, is I want you to note the opacity of the containers we're using. I don't know if you've ever gotten a gallon of milk that was in a container that was actually white, not this translucent or clear. If it is white in coloring, it is not going to work because it needs to have the ability for light to get to the seedlings and to the seeds and to start them. So she observed that, of course, some seeds, which of course we know many of the perennial seeds we grow in the Midwest, do require cold stratification, which requires some time left outside so the seed coats can be cold and moist. And it actually helps to abrade that seed coat in order for it to grow. The winter sowing process is the exact same for all seeds, actually. And basically, instead of providing indoor lights, we're providing the power of the sun and the outside temperature for germination. And that's how it's going to progress. Okay, so let's go over the basic process of seed germination. All right. Um, Here's a little guide up there. And of course, so imbibition, if you've never heard that term before, it's drinking in. And when seeds go from the hard seed coat, the storage package that we all start out with, that seeds they can say, for hundreds of years, they've even seen seeds from King Tut's tomb that they can still germinate today. All they need to be exposed to warmth and they need to be exposed to some light source. So the first thing is they drink in water. Then the next thing is the seed coat softens. And then when soil temperature reaches optimum for that particular seed, that's another great thing about winter sowing. You can have 50 jugs, all with a different seed in them, as opposed to a seed tray where you're constantly juggling back and forth for different types of seeds that will require different start times. First of all, one seed comes up too soon, then you have to move that out. None of that with this, just completely simple. So when the soil temperatures reach ideal germination for that seed, and that's through the genetics of the seed itself, the internal clock of the seed, that's nothing. There's lots of guides, lots of germination guides, lots of Johnny's, the seed company, has a great list of the seed temperatures, and that's particularly when you're germinating inside. But this, you're really leaving it up to Mother Nature. And then eventually the seed root, the coleoptile, that little fatty seed root, and the cotyledon, which we know is that, kind of wing solar panel comes up, and that's how germination starts. Now, we won't see this, but that's what's taking place in the container. Okay, the containers that work for winter sowing, if you go online, just as you can go online for anything, you will see a myriad of choices. There's a few things that I want to stress to not use, okay? Make sure you're using some type of food service container. I saw one time someone starting seeds with antifreeze containers from their windshield fluid. Now, that's not to say you can't wash out a good windshield wiper container, but who needs that extra propylene glycol in your containers to start with? Same thing, nothing from cleaning agents, like no Tide container. Again, those are opaque containers. They are not successful because no light can get in. And also, containers for medication. Now, you can try them if you want, but just make sure everything is really cleaned out. Um, Milk jugs and water jugs are really ideal. If you do this as a group, or if you have someone save those jugs for you, I don't need to gag right now to tell you what it's like when somebody saved you a milk jug that they left the lid on in the back seat of their car for 3 weeks. That is not what you want to encourage. So, washed out with soap and water till it's run clear. Be sure the containers are sturdy enough to withstand winter elements. So, a lot of times you'll see people doing winter sowing using those little berry baskets, the ones that strawberries or blueberries come in. Um, it could be successful. The problem is, though, if we have 40-mile-an-hour winds under some terrible storm for repeated days, those containers aren't going to hold up and they're not going to last. So I would avoid those. I also know people though that have used Ziploc containers, just your basic Ziploc baggie, the freezer style container, and utilize that because they didn't have enough containers. But the key thing is you want something that is durable enough to withstand the weather environment, but also clear enough so that the sun gets in and moisture can get through. You also have to make sure that you have drainage because drainage is the enemy of all, poor drainage is the enemy of all seed starting. So this is my big revelation. So if you have been doing winter sowing ever, or if you have looked at any other winter sowing, you typically see your gallon jug and it's cut open, kind of like a Big Mac container, if you're old enough to remember when containers came like that. Actually, I think the cardboard ones still do. But or like a Muppet head, when a Muppet is smiling and its whole face is open. And that is typically where you take a 3-point cut, and that is the traditional Trudy Davidoff method for doing winter sowing. And you basically make a cut all the way around the waist of the plant, except on the side where the handle is, and then you pop it open, and so you have kind of two halves, okay? My revelation came because I know hundreds of man hours that have been spent by people trying to have something that keeps those containers closed over the winter. When you have them in those Big Mac cut halves, tape, of course, is the first thing you go to. And I don't care if you're using Gorilla Tape, utility tape, the heaviest tape. If we have a really strong winded winter and a lot of elements, a lot of sun, a lot of tough weather, that tape is going to unglue. And it typically unglues in the most unfortunate times, which is right in the middle of winter or just as the plants are starting to germinate. My first experiences in the first 2 years were disasters. First of all, my containers came open, and then we were hit by a 50-mile-an-hour wind, and my containers blew out all over the yard, so I was done for that year. Another year, my containers seemed to stay closed until there was some wildlife issues, and then that became another problem. And so one day I was just monkeying around with the containers, and I came up with this other style cut. I call it the U cut or the garage door cut. You'll notice at the very top of the jug, the container is still connected, but around the other sides, it pushes in, and that's how you will plant. Now, yes, you're probably thinking, well, how do I get the soil in there? That's not very easy. It would be way easier to open the container in half. And that is true. But for the amount of loss you will have on trying to connect those containers together, another one of our educators came up with a new system of using a paper punch in all of the containers to hold the two halves together and then threading yarn in there. That's good for about the first 50, but then you end up with carpal tunnel syndrome. But by utilizing this method, the difference will be when we're taking the plants out of the containers, we're going to be cutting the base of this container all the way down to the base and kind of sliding the plants out. But this system basically keeps your container closed without any or with just one little dab of tape for the entire growing season of winter sowing. The key thing is that in any type of winter sowing, whatever type of winter sowing container you use, it is essential to take the cap off the top. The cap is where winter sowing gets its positivity. It rains in there, it snows in there, it ices in there, and it can do all of those things at once because, of course, many of us here are in Illinois. But you have to have no container. Do not leave the lid on and drill a hole in it. You have to have that removed. That is also your window to the world when it comes to winter sowing. You're not going to be opening the containers at all. It's like having a pot on the stove that you need to keep closed in order for proper cooking to take place. If you keep opening your container, whether it's taped on three sides or if it's using this U-cut method, if you keep poking in there, you're going to alter the temperature inside, and it's also going to dry it out. So that's why you want no container you want no lid on the top, and you want it to be just open for that. The other thing that's required and I don't have a photo of this, I should have included, is you need huge drainage for winter sowing. There are two critical features here. So people will make, I say, quarter-sized holes in that base. So typically these gallon jugs have kind of like a place where they're probably created on the mold or whatever. So in the bottom, it already looks like an X. And I would suggest you make holes that are as large from a nickel to a quarter. You cannot have too much drainage in the bottom. There's a wide variety of options. Some people will use an ice pick and heat it up, poke it through there. Some people will use just a knife. I typically use a pair of scissors when the jug is still intact and when the lid is still on, and I'll stab into the bottom of the container and twist the scissors around a couple times, and that makes for a perfect quarter-size hole. You want 4 holes in the bottom. The other critical thing that's essential in winter sowing is a lot of people will make the right holes, but then in an effort to not lose their containers out in the yard, they put them into a tote that does not have drainage. And the entire container fills up with ice, snow, and water, and you have complete failure. So remember, 4 large holes at the bottom, remove the container lid, and you'll be all set to go. Okay, choosing the right seeds. Now, initially, when this process gets started, the recommendation was to use cold hardy annual seeds. In the vegetable garden, that was anybody you could start early. Um, any type of greens whatsoever, winter sowing is a fantastic way to start salad greens in the spring. But you can also start peas. You can even start, dare I say, root crops. Now, if you told me that you would transplant root crops into a garden, I would say not recommended, highly not recommended. But there are some people that have had great success doing this and enjoy it. They like having their vegetables perfectly spaced, but you have to transplant them early. But really, there isn't a seed that you can't try to do winter sowing in. Um, uh, the only thing I would recommend is, like, for example, in the morning glory family, again, a very warm weather seed, but sometimes those seeds require scarification as opposed to cold treatment. But being in the freeze thaw, freeze thaw, freeze thaw cycle, they will germinate, but you still might want to abrade the surface of those to start. I have a fiber and dyeing garden, fabric dyeing garden, and every year I grow 6 kinds of cotton. And cotton is an incredibly warm weather plant. The cotton I grow in northern Illinois, I am located near Chicago. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Um, the cotton is a very, very late to germinate seed, but I even germinated some old cotton seed using winter sowing, and it was the best cotton I'd ever had. And all of it gets back to this one thing: the top growth is less, and the root system growth is far greater. And as I mentioned before, some of the plants that don't do well indoors with transplant, anybody in that legume family, whether it's the decorative poisonous sweet pea flower or the edible sugar snap snow or English pea, they can be started in winter sowing and broken out. Um, and the greatest thing is that they are already pre-hardened off. If you want to start with some super easy things, particularly if you're working with children, um, uh, or elderly people, those big seeded, like nasturtiums are really good to start. Also, the early snapdragons, sweet alyssum, bachelor buttons of Centaurea cyanus are really good to start with. But really, there isn't a seed that we haven't started. With that example I gave earlier, I hold a program for 4-Hers to do this every winter about this time, and we'll talk about timing in a minute. Um, and I have a seed donation, and so I let them try anything. And the child who won at State Fair, it was his winter sown butternut squash that worked. And again, yes, we can direct sow in the garden, but for this particular individual, it was a great start. And it's a good process for having people understand really the basics of seed starting as well, without, like I said, without having to have a ton of equipment and other things. Okay. Key, no garden soil. I don't care if you have been composting for 40 years, no garden soil. It's full of pathogens. It also has a lot of weed seed in it. And if you think that a little mini greenhouse isn't a great place for seeds to germinate after they've been sitting in their seed coats for 100 years, it is. So use only potting mix and not potting soil. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the difference in these two things, but I always go over it because it's so essential. So you can find things in the store that are called labeled potting soil. Those bags are typically very dark black material. It's a horticultural product called muck, but it is incredibly small particle size, so small that it actually crushes the root systems of plants. That's why a lot of times when people do containerized planting, they'll say, I don't know what's wrong. I use potting soil. It should work. And it turns out a disaster every time. You know, that person that puts 12 plants in, and in October, they can remove those same 12 plants out of the container and put them back into the pot. And then there's the other person who uses potting mix. And potting mix is a combination mostly of organic matter of peat, of some perlite, some vermiculite, and other organic matter. It's very lightweight, and the key feature is it allows for large airspace for the root systems for plants. When I ask people what's the number one thing people need to start plants, it is not water, it's air to the root systems. So here's some other tips and tricks that I use. So the night before I'm going to do winter sowing and also container gardening, I will take the bag of mix, open it up, and I'll pour some water right into the bag so it moistens throughout. You kind of want to massage it around. This gives the materials inside the potting mix time to hydrate, and also equidistantly, because you don't want any dry spots when you're doing this. The day of doing winter sowing, and again, depending on the cut that you choose, if you're using this U-cut method, all you do is in my photo, I showed you my thumb pushing back the container and then filling the soil mixed with 1 inch of the edge of the jug. Actually, I get a little closer than that because you're going to water again before you apply the seeds. And because you want a saturation so much so that you'll have some moisture coming out of the bottom. You don't want any dry spots within there because as wet as this is the substrate that your winter sowing is going to be on for the entire growing time. So then I want you to, like I said, rewater for full hydration. So that would mean water again now that the potting mix is in the container. And then you can add like up to between a half an inch from the waist of the container where the container is. And this applies to both the full cut method as well as the new cut method. Okay. Now, this is another problem when we start seeds is planting them too deeply. This is particularly bad when it comes to winter sowing because these seeds are going to freeze outside for sure, and they're going to thaw and they're going to freeze and thaw, freeze and thaw, freeze and thaw. If they're too deep and the sun doesn't reach them, they're not going to germinate at the optimum time. So for most seeds, the rule is overall, of course, there are instructions on the back of every seed packet. Read that seed packet like a book. But a seed should be sown only as deep as it is thick. So if you've ever seen a carrot seed before, about 30 of them can fit on one eyelash. And I see people all the time digging like a little hole in the ground and sticking their seeds in, and then they wonder why they didn't germinate. Shallower is better than too deep because remember, once that imbibition takes place and the seed drinks in that water and it's now in a precarious state and it comes out, if it doesn't have the energy to boost through the layer of soil to get to the surface so it can use its solar panels with the cotyledons, it's going to die. I sprinkle the seeds lightly on the surface. Some seeds may require a thin layer of soil on top. Check your seed packet. So some of those bigger seeds, not that, again, anyone would necessarily have to start green beans inside, but a green bean and peas are rather substantial size. Nasturtiums are substantial size. And I don't know if you're familiar with this tip or trick, and I have to actually attribute my family for this is, but if you've ever sown small seeds and you're frustrated that you can't get them spaced out well, um, put a small handful of sand into your hand and then sprinkle your seeds into there and then kind of mix them together. That'll help equidistantly distribute your seeds well. And a little sand can't hurt. Okay, labeling. Who wants to play what seed is this? I know a lot of us do every year, and that's even starting seeds inside. It's a great practice to learn what seeds are, but that's not, you don't want to struggle wondering what every seed is. And particularly when it comes to edible seeds versus inedible seeds, I'll just refer back to one I just mentioned, peas. So peas, of course, are edible. English pea, your traditional shelling pea, sugar snap pea, snow pea. The flower, sweet peas, totally poisonous. So it's really essential to label. So labeling is another thing that falls along the how can you come up with the most creative way to label your plants? Now, remember, the biggest problem is our enemy and our best friend in winter sowing is sunlight. Sunlight bleaches out anything, and I have used every Sharpie on the planet to try to make a good label, but every time it has not helped. So you can use different things. One thing I do encourage people is to double label in winter sowing. So if you're utilizing the tongue method or the U method, not on the outside of the container ever, because by the time you get in the house, it has bleached off and you will have no idea what you have in there. On the inside of that tongue, the U, I write what the seed is. And of course, basics of seed labeling, what it is, the day you sowed it, um, any other information you want. I kind of keep it kind of short. And then also put an additional label in the container itself. I actually will use a plastic label like this, or there are a myriad of recycle and upcycle things. Mini plastic blinds that you find on somebody's curb can make you a jackpot of 100 labels. But what do you write on them with? And I have found that the best thing is what they call a paint marker, available in any big box store, but it has a thicker ink to it, and it seems to withstand the elements better. I will also take my labels that are inside and I will label it on the label, and then I will put it into a snack bag and put it in the container, and then you're pretty much assured. The triple fire way, though, is besides having a label in your winter sowing jug itself or on your winter sowing jug inside, is to create like a little table map of just a piece of paper where your jugs are set out and what is in them. Because there's nothing more frustrating than having, say, 50 jugs full of brimming with tons of different types of seedlings and not quite sure what everything is in there. So that's a little tip of that. Okay. Another big thing, you get your jugs out there. Everything's going great. Winter has come. Spring is beckoning. Seedlings are coming up. And there's a raccoon in your containers. It is very frustrating, as I'm sure you know as a gardener, when we have to deal with wildlife. Whether it's a big wildlife, like a deer or a raccoon or an opossum, or whether it's a little wildlife, a slug that has decided to come up inside of your container and eat those perfect little seedlings you just started in winter sowing. So, as far as keeping your jugs together, one really good tip I have is to line up all your jugs with the handles all on the same side. And then use a shovel or a broom handle and slide it through all of them. It kind of locks them together. I've also had success. I personally bungee cord my jugs to my 1960s cyclone fencing, and that is very effective as well. But anything that will hold things together. But as I hearken back to what I said about the drainage issue, do not think to use like, oh, I'll use these Christmas totes. They'll keep them all together. Yes, they will, but it will also fill up with water unless you have holes in those totes. An ideal thing, and I don't know how many people see them anymore, or if they're really legal to have, are dairy containers. You see them a lot at thrift stores now. You know, the dairy containers that would carry gallons of milk or little cartons of milk. They have holes on all sides. They're made of a really rigid plastic. Drawback, only 4 gallons go in there. And once you get going with this, I am convinced that you will just be stopping every neighbor for every container they have to have this uh, winter sowing work for you. Now, wildlife pests. So here's a picture, of course, some chicken wire on the side. You can wrap your containers in chicken wire. And again, now you're thinking, now this was supposed to be carefree. Didn't she say that this wasn't going to take a lot of work? What is all this extra stuff? But acting as a barrier is critical. Also, if you are familiar with the term hardware cloth is a metal screening with holes that are about a quarter of an inch to a half an inch square. They're rather sharp. It can be cut with tin snips. It's really good to put under your containers or even in the bottom of your containers if you want to cut them into little fitting sizes to go inside. Those are definitely reusable year to year. Um, it really helps keep slugs, snails, and other things out from inside of your container. And also, voles aren't really a problem from underneath, but they can be a problem from above. And so, wrapping chicken wire or some other protective nature around your winter sowing jugs is the ultimate way to keep things safe. And again, nothing is perfect. It's kind of trial and error as you go. Okay, so now we've got our jugs outside. They're watered, they're seeded, they're closed in some format, they're secured in a way. Now, what do you do? So, most winter sowing containers require no additional water over the winter. Now, I don't know where you live, but in northern Illinois, for the last 2 winters, we have had a really significant issue with a winter drought. No rain, no snow, totally dry. If it's that, you do have to keep an eye out. And again, I don't want you popping your containers open. Just put your eye up to that opening at the top, look in there, and see if they need moisture. How you will tell more than anything is if you pick up your jugs when you remember when you're setting your jugs out, remember that feel how heavy those jugs were. You want to make sure that weight is still there. And also, if they freeze, it's going to be even heavier. Also, you will notice a pattern of dryness along the top of the potting mix if it's starting to dry out. You water just in the top, you don't dismantle everything, and you just water until water goes through the container. But like I said, it really, except for these 2 drought years, which were extraordinarily meteorologically, it really wasn't a problem to have to water it all throughout until things come up. Okay. If there's no snow or no rain, you can water occasionally, but do not overwater. You do not want to create a mold bin either. So you just want enough water. And remember, with those holes in the bottom, even frozen, the water will migrate to the bottom. Okay. Now, now we have things showing up. Now, this isn't the greatest picture. I should have picked a picture with just the cotyledons, which are those solar panels that are kind of helicopter wing shaped, up with 2 true leaves, the leaves that look like the plant. So, for example, this happens to be a tomato here. When a tomato first comes up, you see those 2 helicopter leaves, and then you'll see the leaves that actually look like a tomato. That is true for every plant you start. Okay. Winter sowing can begin as soon as you have 2 true sets of leaves. So, again, winter sowing transplanting can begin when you have 2 sets of true leaves. So, 2 sets of leaves that look like your marigold or your zinnia or whatever. You do not have to grow a robust, tall plant. The longer you leave your plant in the container, the greater the energy budget it needs. So if you let your plant get to the size of this tomato, you definitely are going to have to water and your plants are going to start to get crowded. But you have a wide berth of time in order to do transplantation. Okay. You can wait, as many of these 4-Hers do, until their seedlings are quite big to transplant, but you just have to babysit them more. Okay. How do you get the seedlings out of these containers now? So as you'll notice, this is my original container. That's my lettuce seedlings, mixed greens in there. And I'm just taking a set of scissors and slicing down both sides in the front. I'll pull down the bottom like a trap door and I'll slide out all of the seedlings. Now, when you winter sow, you have 2 choices. You can, just as you do when you seed inside, you can broadcast seed where you have a lot of seeds all over and you're going to divide them out by little chunks, or you can do individual seed sowing, depending on what it is. So for that cotton, I put in 12 seeds separate of each other, so each plant was separate from itself. When I seeded any type of mixed greens, any things that I wanted to sow thickly, I used this broadcast method. And Trudy came up with a term called hunk o' seedlings. as a way to get the plants out. So you're going to slide the plants out, and you can take out a section at a time. You can leave the rest in there till you're ready to use more. It's a great little holdover container. And also, once you get your plants out of the container, you can cut off the bottom of your remaining jug and use it as kind of a little seed cloche to keep the plants that you've started if we've had into some really rough weather. But you're going to notice a gigantic, robust root system when you get the plants out. Okay. The key thing is when the plants are out, you'll have either a pile of seedlings, like poppies are incredibly small seeds. So I will conservatively have 200 seeds in about a 4-inch period in a square. And I'll cut them into postage stamp sized chunks, inch by inch, and I will just plant that whole chunk together. The seedlings will figure it out for themselves. You'll have some winners and some losers, just like the Darwin Award, and you'll have successful seedlings from that. Or you can do individual seedling and transplant them as you go. The best thing is when you're done with this, you can recycle your jugs when you're done. I hope this has provided you with a lot of information about gardening in winter sowing. Enjoy the benefits of winter sowing. It's a time saver, it's cost effective, it's resourceful, and it can kind of help you with year-round gardening.
So we have the recording will be posted to the horticulture YouTube channel, and here is the link for that. We'll also have our Four Seasons webinar survey for this particular topic that you can scan this QR code to go directly there to the survey, or the short URL is go.illinois.edu/winter sowing -tips. If you have additional questions about this topic, you can reach out to Nancy at Kuhajda@illinois.edu.